May 9, 2011. The courtroom settled into a silence so heavy it felt deliberate, as Chris Coleman stood waiting for a sentence that would define the rest of his existence. Once a man trusted to protect powerful figures, to anticipate danger before it surfaced, he now faced judgment for a crime that erased every version of the life he once knew. What unfolded that day was not simply a legal conclusion. It was the beginning of a punishment many argue is more severe than death itself. When the cameras stopped recording and the courtroom doors closed, Coleman vanished into a system designed not to rehabilitate, but to contain. Yet beyond those walls, public fascination never faded. The judge imposed 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 1 for his wife, Sheri, 1 for his son, Garett, and 1 for his son, Gavin. The ruling carried no ambiguity. Coleman would never walk free again. The absence of the death penalty felt like restraint. Others believed execution would have been the more just outcome, arguing that allowing him to live was an act of mercy rather than punishment. But by the end of this video, you may see that survival inside a maximum security prison can be far more unforgiving than any execution chamber. Before you decide, you need to understand where Chris Coleman was sent and why that decision ensured his sentence would never truly end. Before we move deeper into the consequences of Chris Coleman's sentence, there is a question that must be addressed. How does a man who once identified threats for a living become one himself? The answer begins not with punishment, but with classification. From the courthouse, Coleman was transported directly to Pontiac Correctional Center, a facility designed to absorb individuals whose presence alters the balance of an entire population. Pontiac was not chosen for comfort, rehabilitation, or reflection. It was chosen for control. The intake process unfolded without ceremony. Officers reviewed his file with practiced detachment. Triple homicide, child victims, national media attention. Each line added weight to the decision already forming. Coleman was immediately placed into the highest risk category available. This designation did not reflect his behavior inside the prison. It reflected the reaction his crime would provoke from others. In environments governed by unspoken codes, crimes against children are not debated. They are condemned. Inside Pontiac, former identity evaporated quickly. The authority he once carried, the discipline he once commanded, the respect he once received, none of it translated beyond the intake gate. He was no longer a protector. He was an object of risk. Officers received briefing sheets outlining his notoriety, the likelihood of retaliation, and the necessity of constant supervision. Coleman entered the facility not as a man beginning a sentence, but as a variable that required containment. Movement was immediately restricted. Escorts accompanied him through corridors. Doors opened and closed on schedules not his own. Every step was monitored not as punishment but as prevention. The instincts he once used outwardly now turned inward. Awareness became vigilance. Control became restraint. Anticipation became survival. Pontiac did not allow space for adjustment. It demanded submission to structure. It became clear within hours that Pontiac was not a permanent solution. Protective custody units were limited, and Coleman's case made anonymity impossible. Word travels quickly in prison environments, especially when crimes involve children. Administrators understood that no amount of supervision could eliminate risk entirely. Pontiac could delay harm, but it could not prevent it indefinitely. His presence disrupted equilibrium. Other inmates did not need details. The label alone was enough. Staff recognized the danger long before Coleman fully understood it himself. Pontiac was a holding point, not a destination. A place to stabilize risk while determining where he could exist without immediate violence. The decision came swiftly. Illinois correctional authorities approved an out-of-state transfer, a measure reserved for cases deemed exceptionally volatile. Coleman met every criterion: high media exposure, crimes involving minors, public outrage that extended beyond state lines. Remaining in Illinois would require constant intervention. Wisconsin offered distance, separation, and administrative control. Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun was selected. Its reputation was built on structure and isolation. High-risk inmates were managed through separation rather than integration. Contact was minimized. Visibility was controlled. Movement was reduced to eliminate unpredictability. Dodge was not designed to rehabilitate men like Coleman. It was designed to keep them alive. The transfer occurred before dawn. Coleman was restrained, escorted, and removed from Pontiac before the facility fully woke. Routes were undisclosed. Timing was intentional. This was not transport for convenience. It was relocation for containment. Every aspect of the process reflected an understanding that his presence carried consequences. Crossing the state line marked a psychological threshold. In Illinois, Coleman had familiarity. In Wisconsin, he had nothing but his case file. Dodge did not offer orientation in the traditional sense. It imposed routine immediately. Isolation was not introduced gradually. It was implemented as a baseline. At Dodge, isolation is not an exception. It is a management tool. For inmates like Coleman, it defines daily existence. Exposure is reduced, but so is contact. Movement is controlled, but so is stimulation. The world narrows to concrete, steel, and silence. Safety is achieved by eliminating interaction. And this raises the first unavoidable question. Was this transfer an act of protection, or the first layer of a punishment designed to unfold slowly over time? Before the crime, before the courtroom, before the transfer that reshaped his existence, Chris Coleman lived a life that appeared orderly and dependable. His early years in the United States Marine Corps instilled discipline that became central to his identity. Structure governed his behavior. Routine shaped his interactions. Compliance became a language others trusted. When he joined the Joyce Meyer Ministry security team, those traits became assets. He operated in environments that demanded discretion and reliability. Protecting a high-profile evangelical figure required vigilance and restraint. To colleagues, Coleman was steady. To church members, he represented safety. His posture, uniform, and professionalism reinforced an image aligned with order and faith. At home, the appearance of stability continued. His wife, Sheri, maintained a household centered around routine. Their sons, Garett and Gavin, moved through childhood milestones captured in photographs that reflected normalcy. School events, birthdays, holidays. Their home in Columbia, Illinois showed no visible fractures. Neighbors saw consistency. Community members saw alignment with shared values. Coleman's career demanded spotless conduct. The ministry operated under strict moral expectations. Employees were expected to embody the values they represented publicly. Divorce, scandal, or personal controversy were not tolerated. These were not guidelines. They were conditions of employment. Coleman understood the stakes. It was within this framework that his relationship with Tara Lynch developed. Initially quiet, initially contained, removed from the world his family inhabited. What began as connection evolved into something that threatened the structure he had built. The affair existed in direct conflict with his professional identity. Maintaining the secret required effort. Messages had to be hidden. Time had to be accounted for. Each decision added pressure. Exposure would not only cost him his job. It would dismantle his reputation, collapse his identity, and sever the image that protected him from scrutiny. As the tension grew, so did the need for control. The contrast between his public role and private behavior sharpened. The fear of losing everything intensified. Every concealment demanded another. Every deception required reinforcement. Then the threats began. Anonymous emails arrived, hostile in tone and personal in content. The messages suggested surveillance, punishment, consequence. At first, they appeared external, a faceless intruder targeting the family. As time passed, the threats expanded. Sheri received messages. Graffiti appeared inside the home. The illusion of danger grew. Investigators would later analyze these communications in detail. Forensic linguistics revealed patterns. Syntax, phrasing, and rhythm aligned with Coleman's known writing style. The graffiti paint matched a recent purchase. The supposed forced entry showed no disturbance. The narrative of an outside threat began to fracture. What appeared to be chaos revealed orchestration. The threats were not random. They were constructed, designed to redirect suspicion and justify fear. This manufactured narrative framed Coleman as a target rather than a source of danger. To those who did not look closely, it was plausible. To those who did, inconsistencies accumulated. The illusion held until it could no longer support itself. On the morning of May 5, 2009, the performance ended. Sheri and her sons were killed between approximately 3 and 5 a.m. The timeline placed the murders before Coleman left for the gym. The scene showed no struggle, no forced entry, no intrusion. The staging was meant to divert attention. Instead, it concentrated it. Every detail pointed inward. The calm demeanor, the collapsing alibi, the linguistic links, the receipts, the undisturbed window. The illusion dissolved under evidence. And once it did, there was no retreat. When the trial began, the prosecution did not present a story of sudden violence. They presented a sequence of decisions: desire, fear, preservation of identity. The staged threats became evidence of planning. The affair became motive. The timeline became constraint. Jurors heard how the emails mirrored Coleman's writing patterns. They saw how the graffiti paint matched his purchase history. They examined timelines that placed the murders before his morning routine. The absence of forced entry removed the possibility of an outsider. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. 3 life sentences without parole. Illinois no longer allowed the death penalty. The sentence carried finality without execution. After sentencing, Coleman entered Dodge Correctional Institution under protective custody. There, isolation governs existence. His cell contains only essentials: a metal bed, a thin mattress, a fixed shelf, a steel toilet and sink. Light enters through a narrow window that does not allow time to be measured easily. 23 hours a day are spent inside that space. The remaining hour, when granted, occurs alone in a controlled enclosure. No shared meals, no communal yard, no physical contact. Even showers occur under supervision. Protective custody is not comfort. It is containment. Prevents violence by eliminating interaction. But isolation carries consequences. Over time, sensory deprivation alters perception. Thoughts recycle. Time distorts. Emotional numbness replaces reaction. Research on extended isolation shows patterns. Anxiety increases. Sleep disrupts. Concentration declines. Identity erodes. For inmates serving life without parole, these effects accumulate without relief. There is no future milestone. No release date. Only repetition. Coleman maintains his innocence. He claims he was framed. This denial functions as psychological armor. Acceptance would require confronting irreversible loss. Denial preserves fragments of identity at the cost of truth. But denial also imprisons. Without acknowledgement, there is no progression. The mind loops through explanations that cannot alter reality. The gap between evidence and self-perception widens. Outside the prison, the world moves on. Headlines fade. New cases emerge. Inside, time stalls. Each day mirrors the last. Punishment becomes duration rather than finality. This is the question that remains. Is justice better served through an ending or through endless continuation? Is death more severe than decades of isolation that erode identity piece by piece? Coleman's sentence offers no conclusion, only persistence. And that persistence may be the harshest punishment of all. Inside Dodge, the days do not progress. They recycle. Each morning arrives without distinction. Each night closes without resolution. The silence is deliberate, measured, and permanent. But beyond the concrete walls and locked doors, time behaves differently. The world continues its forward motion, indifferent to the sentence being served in isolation. Headlines fade. Names lose urgency. Public attention migrates toward newer crimes, newer victims, newer outrage. What once dominated national conversation becomes a footnote, resurfacing only when a documentary airs or a podcast revisits the case. That contrast is impossible to ignore. Outside, life expands. Inside, it contracts, a society that evolves alongside a man whose existence is frozen, and a family whose lives ended in a single morning, yet whose absence continues to echo long after the news cycle moved on. This imbalance forces a question that has never settled into consensus. For some, justice demands finality. The death penalty represents an ending that mirrors the permanence of the crime itself. It draws a definitive boundary, closing the narrative with a single, irreversible act. There is no extension, no repetition, no lingering uncertainty. The punishment concludes the story. But life without parole operates differently. It denies conclusion. It replaces finality with endurance. Instead of ending accountability, it stretches it across decades, ensuring that each day carries the same unaltered weight. There is no release, no reduction, no moment when the sentence becomes lighter. The punishment does not arrive all at once. It accumulates. Coleman's reality exists entirely within that accumulation. His story did not end with sentencing. It reset. Every morning begins under identical conditions. Every night closes without the possibility of relief. The environment remains unchanged. The restrictions remain absolute. Time becomes repetitive rather than progressive. Psychological consequences unfold slowly, not explosively. Identity does not shatter in a moment. It erodes. This is where the dilemma sharpens. Is justice better served by a single, decisive conclusion, or by a lifetime of controlled existence that dismantles the self gradually? One approach prioritizes closure. The other prioritizes continuity. One ends the punishment. The other ensures it never ends. Both positions carry moral weight. Both leave unanswered questions. For some, prolonged confinement reflects the seriousness of the crime more accurately than any execution could. For others, the absence of a definitive end feels unresolved. So the question remains with you. Not whether the verdict was correct, but whether the punishment itself fulfills the purpose of justice. Is the removal of hope proportionate to the harm caused? Or does justice require something different? Comment below. Is life without parole the harsher sentence? And if this examination stayed with you, subscribe for more explorations like this.